I've been delivering pizzas in Louisville, Kentucky for years. It's usually a straightforward job. Drop off the pizza, collect the cash, and move on. But one night, things took a turn I'll never forget. It was a quiet Wednesday night, not many orders, and I was about ready to clock out when the last one came in. The address was a bit out of the way, in an older neighborhood I didn't visit often. I figured I'd deliver the pizza and head home. I pulled up to the house, a two-story, with peeling paint and overgrown bushes. The porch light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. I grabbed the pizza and walked up to the door, noticing it was slightly ajar. I knocked, but there was no response. Hello. I called out, but only silence answered. Something didn't feel right. I should have left the pizza on the porch and walked away, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and musty, with a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn. I called out again, but still, no answer. As I was about to leave, I heard a faint noise, almost like a muffled cry, coming from somewhere below. Against my better judgment, I found the basement door half open at the end of a hallway. I hesitated, but the noise grew louder, like someone in distress. My heart raced as I started down the creaky wooden stairs, the dim light from my phone barely cutting through the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, I was hit with a cold draft and the unmistakable scent of fear. The basement was dimly lit, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw a group of men standing in a circle. They were dressed in dark, tattered clothes, their faces hidden by hoods. In the center of the circle was a woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with terror. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I was frozen in place. They hadn't noticed me yet, too focused on whatever twisted ritual they were performing. I could see their lips moving, chanting something low and rhythmic, but I couldn't make out the words. Panic surged through me, and I knew I had to get out of there before they saw me. Slowly, I started backing up the stairs, trying to avoid the creaky spots. But halfway up, my foot slipped, and a loud creak echoed through the basement. Their heads snapped up in unison, and I saw the flash of something metallic in one of their hands. Without thinking, I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear them shouting, their footsteps pounding after me as I raced to the front door. I didn't look back as I sprinted to my car, fumbling with the keys before finally getting the door open. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and peeled out of there, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I drove straight to the nearest police station, and by the time I got there, I was barely able to get the words out. They took my statement, and I showed them where the house was. The next day, the story was all over the news, but they never found the men. The woman was gone too, like she had never been there. I quit delivering pizzas after that. No job is worth what I saw that night. I work as a pizza delivery driver in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a job that pays the bills, and usually, the nights are pretty quiet. But one night, I got an order that I'll never forget. It was around 11:30 p.m. when the call came in. An order for a large pepperoni out on the outskirts of town. The address was unfamiliar, but I didn't think much of it. I needed the money, so I grabbed the pizza and headed out. As I drove further away from the city, the streets became darker and the houses more spread out. The GPS led me to a rundown area, where most of the homes looked abandoned. When I pulled up to the address, I felt a knot in my stomach. The house was in bad shape, overgrown weeds, broken windows, and a door hanging slightly off its hinges. It didn't look like anyone lived there, but I was already there, and I didn't want to go back empty-handed. I grabbed the pizza and walked to the front door, hesitating before knocking. The sound echoed through the empty night, and for a moment, I thought no one would answer. But then, I heard shuffling inside, and the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway. He looked rough, disheveled, with wild eyes and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He stared at me for a moment before forcing a smile and asking, "You got my pizza?" I handed it over, trying to keep my cool. "That'll be $15.99. He fumbled in his pockets, then looked at me with a strange intensity. "Come inside. I've got the money in the kitchen." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but I didn't want to be rude or lose the tip. I followed him inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house was worse on the inside. It smelled like mold, and the air was thick with something I couldn't quite place. As I walked further in, I noticed chains bolted to the walls and floor, some with cuffs attached. My stomach turned. This wasn't right. Suddenly, the man lunged at me, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me toward the restraints. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free. He was stronger than he looked, his grip like iron. I kicked out, managing to catch him in the shin, and he loosened his hold just enough for me to slip away. I bolted for the door, my heart racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911. The police arrived quickly, but it felt like an eternity. They went inside, and I watched from a distance, still trembling. When they came back out, they told me I was lucky to be alive. The man had been abducting delivery drivers for months, but I was the first to escape. I quit my job the next day. I can't go near that part of town anymore, and I still have nightmares about what could have happened. That night changed everything for me, and I'll never forget the terror of being trapped in that house with a madman. Delivering pizzas around Orlando, Florida, usually felt like an easy gig. Sure, there were some sketchy neighborhoods, but most of the time, it was routine work, until the night I got sent to the old house on the edge of town. The place looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades. The yard was overgrown, and the windows were dark, almost like they were peering back at me. I hesitated before knocking, thinking about just leaving the pizza on the porch and bailing. But I needed the tip. An elderly man answered the door, his face gaunt and eyes hollow. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Come in," he rasped, his voice dry and cracked. I left the cash in the kitchen. "Just give me a moment." I stepped inside, the floor creaking under my feet. The house smelled of mildew and something else I couldn't quite place. A scent that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I waited in the living room, glancing around to pass the time. That's when I noticed the photographs. Old, black and white pictures lined the walls. Each one showing a person with wide, frightened eyes, their expressions frozen in terror. It was unsettling, to say the least. I wondered if it was some kind of sick art collection. Minutes passed, and the old man didn't return. My nerves were starting to fray, so I decided to check on him. "Sir?" I called out as I walked towards the kitchen. The moment I stepped through the doorway, my stomach dropped. The old man was standing there, facing the counter with a large knife in his hand, muttering to himself. His voice was low and almost incoherent, but I caught the word sacrifices more than once. Panic surged through me, and I took a step back, but the floor creaked, and he turned, his eyes locking onto mine. For a split second, we just stared at each other. Then, with a sudden burst of speed I didn't expect from someone his age, he lunged at me. I barely had time to react. Instinct took over, and I grabbed a heavy frying pan off the counter, swinging it with all my might. The impact sent him sprawling to the floor, and I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I bolted out of the house, my heart racing, and jumped into my car, slamming the door and speeding away. I drove straight to the nearest police station, my hands trembling as I recounted what had happened. They didn't seem to believe me at first, but when they went to check out the house, they found more than they bargained for. The old man had been taking in drifters and delivery drivers, murdering them, and snapping their photos before hiding the bodies in the basement. It was all over the news the next day. I haven't delivered a pizza since that night. I can't get those photos out of my head, and I still hear his voice, muttering about sacrifices. I try to forget, but some things just stick with you, no matter how hard you try.